Well, here we are again around the campfire.
It's another Halloween season.
Halloween just right around the corner. I really do like doing this. This is probably my favorite part of the year for what we do.
The Halloween specials are absolutely my favorite part.
You know, of course, you have the strange sounds. And then, you know, the potential for strange creatures in the woods.
Well, that's why this week, we've done haunted house versions. We've done floating at the lake. And Bill, I knew how big of a Bigfoot fanatic you are. So here we are at Camp Bigfoot here in the Ozarks.
Out in the woods, hoping to see or hear something.
You're hoping to see or hear something. I'm not so sure. But here around the campfire, and, you know, while we're waiting on Bigfoot to make his presence, what better time to share a few stories?
From a child born into this world, we are taught what to believe. Closed-minded we become, fearful to be deceived. Still we desire to know what lies beyond that locked door. The art of the storyteller, conjuring tales of legend and lore. History hidden, lost knowledge, things forgotten and the unknown. These are the things that direct us and will set the tone. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
So in true Halloween fashion, I found something here a couple weeks back out of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch.
Is this the story that I read?
Yes.
This
I let you read this.
Kind of ridiculous.
It is. Oh, well, just blow the sail out here.
It's a crazy story.
It's
insane.
Crazy story.
It's a local story, too, apparently.
Yes, right here near Lebanon, Missouri, our home base. But it took place on July 28th, 1879. It was a humid, hot summer day here in the Ozarks, late July. A local Methodist minister by the name of James Alberry was making his rounds, and he'd stopped at this rural farmer's home by the name of Henry Miller, just outside of Lebanon, Missouri. With it being right about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right in the heat of the day. And of course, back in 1879, it was way before air conditioning existed. So the two men were out on the front porch, just hoping for a little bit of a breeze to come up on the hill and lessen that summer heat. But as they visited one another, a horrible sound was heard from Farmer Miller's hog brooding pen. One of his big sow hogs had given birth to a litter of 10 young ones, and he had put them away safely, or so he thought. As the men raced off the porch, heading directly towards the ruckus coming from the brooding house, they froze in fear as they arrived, being almost mesmerized by what they saw. It was this big female sow hog squealing and shaking, almost paralyzed in the corner of this pen, and her 10 little piglets just running around rampantly across in the fence and enclosure. What they saw, they described as a 40 to 50 foot long snake with a flat, large head, stated to be, and I loved this, as big as a beer keg.
It's a big snake.
It's a big snake. It had fish-like scales that glistened in a rainbow of reflective silver tones in the summer sun. But as they grabbed a rake and a stick, the closest things they could reach, they quickly learned this wasn't just a huge snake. There was a lot more to it. This giant 40 to 50 foot snake had flaming red eyes as it glared in the sun at them, and they noticed its tail was split, divided into 2 parts at the tips, each part being about 9 foot, which seemed to make this monster be able to balance a lot more with dexterity and agility. But then the snake let out this horrific hissing noise, opening its mouth to extract 3 giant fangs, which the men said were approximately 4 feet in length each. That's a big fang. As the snake continued hissing, 19 smaller snakes ranging anywhere from 12 to 18 inches leapt out of the inside of this large serpent's mouth. I thought 19 was a very odd number. 19 smaller snakes, not 20, Not 10, not a dozen, 19.
Well, when confronted with something like this, who takes the time to count?
Right? I mean, come on. Well, anyhow, these 19 smaller snakes, 12 to 18 inches, immediately violently started attacking these 10 tiny little piglets, killing 4 of them as the men struggled to shake off this mesmerizing trance that seemed to fall upon them upon the giant snakes staring directly at them. Now, the 2 men, Farmer Miller and Reverend James Albery, entered the pen and apparently somehow managed to scare this large serpent away. It had coiled up and raised its head over the wooden fence enclosure, but finally now retreated its head back, turned away, and as it did, it then exposed translucent pair of wings, each one of the wings about 15 foot in length. Now, seemingly that's pretty small wings for a snake that's 40 to 50 foot in size. And as it began to flap these wings just enough to carry most of its weight, it drug this forked tail across the hayfield with the men in hot pursuit. Now, obviously, this led this kind of trough, this flattened down area, so it was quite easy to follow all the way to the point it got to the forest, and it disappeared, vanished in the underbrush. Now, within an hour, reinforcements were called, who arrived with guns and revolvers, and a body of men surrounded the entire area of woods, beating the brush throughout. But the giant monster had vanished. And it said, however, the area of the forest was on a bluff near a river, where several natural caves were. Now, needless to say, with a report like this from 2 honorable and respected men of the area, the entire area was on edge for weeks, but serpent would never be seen again. Now, weeks later, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch was coming through Lebanon, and they interviewed Reverend James Albany just to double-check the facts of the story. Now, he swore with a signed affidavit the description was not only correct, but he even added a few more tidbits. He reiterated neither of the men saw the wings until that snake retreated and turned. They had folded so perfectly up against the side of the snake they were almost invisible. But he did describe them more as membrane, but a translucent, transparent type skin flap. He also stated the snake did not only hiss, but he described it what would be more of an accurate description as a loud, grumbling roar. Now, I know the story may seem hard to believe, but there are several uncanny similarities with this 1879 sighting to that of an Aztec legend, a deity, if you will, known as Cuauhtémoc, a spiritual, large-winged snake with mesmerizing eyes and the ability to charm and cast magic. However, in Aztec legend, these divine good creatures were on average about half the size of this giant Missouri encounter. Also worth mentioning, there are some Native American tales of a similar creature that was said to dwell in the massive Ozark cave systems in the area, which is what ultimately makes Missouri the cave state. Something kind of made a chuckle up there. I don't know if I made Bigfoot laugh or not, but...
Well, it's kind of a crazy story.
It is a crazy story.
Yeah, when I read that story, I really thought, like, you were going to try to convince me that this was a whole episode of the podcast. And I thought, Eric, that's not going to be enough.
I think it's interesting. It was a minister, a Methodist minister, and a farmer.
Yeah, I mean, somebody who would be trustworthy in the community.
And I'm sorry, it sounds like they were drinking something more than the Ozark water that day.
I find it hard to believe. But then again, I mean, I've had people tell me all kinds of things. And then, of course, you have
life today,
sounds coming out of the woods around us. Who knows what those are?
Yeah.
Well, I decided for my first part to tackle what is a uniquely American ghost story, if not one of the first American ghost stories. And that is the legend of Sleepy Hollow. Now, I'm not going to retell the whole story here. I'm going to kind of summarize it. But I think we're all familiar with it. We've probably all seen the Disney version. I'm sure you've seen the Disney version of Sleepy Hollow.
I actually touched on this, I think, in one of our other Halloween episodes.
And I know you have the Johnny Depp version. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow was written by Washington Irving. It was written in 1820. Now, the story takes place one autumn night in 1790. in the New York village of Sleepy Hollow in Westchester County. And in the story, the lanky newcomer and schoolmaster Ichabod Crane is courting the young, beautiful Katrina von Tassel, a young heiress who's also being pursued by ruggedly handsome and muscular Dutchman Brom Bones. Now, after being turned down by Katrina at a party at the Van Tassel farm, where ghost stories were shared, Ichabod is chased down by the Headless Horseman on his way home, who's said to be the ghost of a revolutionary soldier, or who may or may not be his rival Brom Bones in disguise, who hurls a pumpkin at the man, throwing Ichabod from his horse. The schoolmaster vanishes, never to be seen again, and really it's left up to the reader of the story to decide Ichabod's fate. Irving himself concluded the tale. The old country wives, however, who are the best judges of these matters, maintain to this day that Ichabod was spirited away by supernatural means, and it is a favorite story often told about the neighborhood round the winter evening fire. Now, Irving himself may have been inspired by other earlier stories, including a tale of an actual Hessian soldier who had been decapitated by a cannonball during the Battle of White Plains around Halloween in 1776. The horseman represents a past that never dies but always hunts the living, seeking revenge, and, of course, a head to replace that which he lost.
Of course.
Now, this is regarded as the first truly American ghost story, and it endures because it still captures the American imagination. It's around the Revolutionary time period, the foundations of our country, and it's sort of a melting pot. You've got the Danish influences and whatnot. But the tales of Headless Horsemen can be traced way back to the Middle Ages, where the Phantom Riders were terrorizing people all over Europe. You have the Dullahan of Ireland, a tale rooted in Celtic mythology where the Dullahan was a fertility god named Crom Dubh, who insisted on a ritual sacrifice by decapitation. He was banished following the arrival of Christianity, but tales persist of the Dullahan haunting the countryside on horseback, carrying his own head, and is regarded as an omen of doom. If you hear the horseman riding through your town and you should happen to open your door, you can expect to be splashed in the face with blood as he rides by.
Nice.
The island of Mull, off the west coast of Scotland, has Ewan of the Little Head, son and heir of a local clan chief who lost his head in battle in 1538. His horse ran for miles along the river carrying his headless body, until it became exhausted and stopped near a waterfall. And ever since, it is said that Ewan's headless ghost haunts the paths of Mull on horseback. Germany has the story of Hans Jägenteufel, a horseless rider condemned to wander the earth as a price for the sins he committed in life. There's also Der Doppflosser Ritter, the headless rider, a horseman who emerges from the forest to warn people of impending danger. In South Texas, you have the stories of El Muerto del Rodeo. The tales say he is the ghost of a rider executed for hustling in South Texas in the 19th century, whose head was tied to his horse, which was then slapped on the flanks and let loose to act as a warning to other hustlers. He still haunts the route his body and horse once took to this day. In England, they tell of the Headless Horsemen of Devon. One such figure haunts the moor of Dartmoor. Another is said to be the ghost of a priest who was beheaded in the Middle Ages, who travels through one of the oldest roads in the town of Torquay. Another version has a coach led by a horse being driven by a headless man.
I think we need to have a reunion of Headless Horsemen. Get
Bring
them
all
all
the Headless
together.
Horsemen together.
And we'll interview them.
Was
That'd be
it like a
great.
Ghost Rider kind of thing?
Oh, yes, yes. Speaking of which, you smell that?
I mean, I smell something. I thought it was you.
It was not me. I did not eat at Taco Bell, but that is a very pungent, unpleasant smell.
You ever heard the joke? I ate at Taco Bell. What did you get? Oh, same thing as always, diarrhea.
Diarrhea. Taco Bell's not sponsoring us, ever.
I don't think we have any sponsors, ever. I think we poke fun at too many. Wait,
What was that?
sounds like it's getting closer.
That
Not sure.
smell's not getting any further away. I know that. Well, I've got another story called The Sight. Until recent years, midwives always attended women during childbirth. One of the midwife's many duties was to tell mothers when their babies were born with the caul, a filmy, thick, skin-like residue from the amniotic fluid that covered some of the infants' faces. Now, depending on if you were a believer or not, those born with the veil were said to possess powers of psychic sight. But some never got the power. But for those who did, it could be both a blessing as well as a curse. Now, such in this story of a Missouri African-American family of the 1920s. "Your baby's been born with a veil over his face," the midwife told Amanda Mays. "Are you a believer?" Amanda nodded. "Well, then he may have the sight." Worry lines creased the new mother's face as the woman explained. "The sight comes, if it comes, in different ways. Some can see spirits, others see the future, or can divine. Make sure he uses it wisely, or it will bring trouble upon him." Now, the sight would in fact come to Esau, the young boy child, 3 times during his life. The first, when he was a mere 6 years old. Esau and his mother lived on a small rural farm just outside of St. Charles, Missouri, where Amanda scratched out a living doing laundry, household chores for others. Esau's father had left way before his birth, and only frequently would appear with empty promises, a few dime store gifts, and then would vanish as suddenly as his arrival. So Amanda was the sole provider for her young son and often worked many long hours. It was on one evening when she returned home to find a somewhat panicked Esau. He ran to his mother crying, saying he had seen Ms. Toppy, a family friend and a church lady. He went on to tell his mother vivid details that "Ms. Toppy won't be at church Sunday, Mama. Said she's fallen and broken her leg." Amanda held her boy in her arms, tried to calm him. "Honey, who told you Ms. Toppy broke her leg? I seen her earlier today, and she seemed just fine." The 6-year-old Esau looked up into his mother's eyes and said, But Mama, I seen it. I heard her fall. I heard her calling out." Now, Amanda did not connect the dots at the time to Esau being born with the veil, since what she had been told many years ago never seemed to come to occurrence. However, 2 days later, when they both went to church, sure enough, Toppy Perkins, affectionately known as Ms. Toppy, wasn't in attendance. After the services, Amanda and Esau were shaking the minister's hands as they left the building, and Amanda inquired about Ms. Toppy to the minister. He reported, Ms. Toppy fell a spell, went and broke her leg, but she's doing well, and she hopes to join us in just a few weeks." Shocked and astonished, Amanda quickly left with Esau's tiny hand clutched in hers, fleeing to the car and the ride home. She shared with him on that trip the meaning of the sight to her young boy, who listened intently. She cautioned him to never use his abilities for ill intentions, or he could lose them, and fate would certainly follow him. Together, the mother and young son decided to keep this a secret, in which Esau did, seemingly learning to turn it off. Now, the second time Esau had the sight would come on his 10th birthday, when his father, a man by the name of Tall Mays, showed up out of the blue. He was driving a brand new, shiny 1931 Ford, and he was dressed very nicely and showered both of them with very nice gifts. Now, he swore to the couple that he had changed his ways, and he was on to something good, and this time he was home to stay a spell. Now, a week later, Esau went into St. Charles, Missouri with his father. When his father, Tall, left the son there in the car, saying, "I'll return, I've got to make a quick phone call," which he did, and he returned 15 minutes later. Now, Tall slipped in underneath the steering wheel into the driver's seat, where Esau blurted out, "Those men you owe money to, they're coming to hurt you bad, Pa. You can't hide here anymore." Tall glared at his son. "How did you know that?" Without thinking, Esau said, "'Cause I had a vision, and I seen 'em beating you, 'cause you stole their money." Esau then realized in his haste that he had made a mistake, spilling his secret that he had kept for years. His father spoke, "So you do have the vision. Well, what a deal this is. Boy, you can help me out." Esau cried back, "No, Pa. Mama says I can't use it for bad or I'll lose it." Tall smiled and replied, "Well, I wouldn't dream of making you do anything wrong." But Esau knew better. Upon arriving home, Tall started packing bags and loading the car. Amanda was working late again, so she wasn't home. Esau was told to go, get in the car, and they were driving into the city before nightfall, where Father Tall promised Amanda would join them later in Kansas City. Now, upon arriving in Kansas City, Esau's fears came full circle. His father took him to the horse races the next morning, using his skills to predict the winners. Within that day, his father had won enough money to pay off his entire debt to the loan sharks. Esau was uneasy, but his father had assured him this was using his power for good, because surely he saved him from the beating that he had envisioned. But that wasn't enough. Tal would not leave. Esau argued, "Pa, let's just go. Pay them off and let's just go home." But Tal wasn't having it. He said, "Why would we leave, boy? We're on a roll. Keep telling me who to bet on, and we can surprise your mama with a new life, a better life for all of us." Esau did as his father demanded, and he continued to win, until Esau finally intentionally lied, giving his father the wrong horse to bet on. This caused him to lose everything they had won that entire day. Father Tal was furious and raced the boy back home without barely speaking a word, literally dumping him out in the drive and speeding off into the dust of the night. A decade passed, and Esau assumed because he had used his sight wrongly, it had left him. And so it seemed to lay silently within him. He went off to war to fight in World War II and was one of the few who returned home safely. He would eventually marry and start his own family with several children of his own, living just miles away from his mother's house in St. Charles. Now this would be the third and the final time Esau's powers of a vision would come to him. He awakened from a deep sleep, paralyzed in fear, what we would call today as sleep paralysis. He could hear, he could see, and he could smell. He laid in bed as if he was paralyzed. The room slowly filled with smoke. He could hear his wife calling out for him. He could hear his children screaming, "Daddy, Daddy, save us!" The house was on fire, but he couldn't move a muscle to help. He felt the heat of the flames. And then it was almost like he left his body. He drifted down a hallway to see a kerosene heater, which had aged poorly and seemed to be the source of the fire. Then there was a sudden pain in his leg, so agonizing that he sat straight up in bed and found himself drenched wet, scaring his wife, who all the time had been lying next to him in bed, trying to awaken and calling out his name. Now Esau did not want to frighten his wife or his family. They didn't even know of his former abilities, and he chose to keep it a secret once again. This continued on many nights. At first, once a week, then more and more frequent, each time getting worse and worse. Each time he laid paralyzed in bed to envision and hear the death of his entire family. And a horrific fire, each dream lasting longer, until the same pain in his leg would each time awaken him. Again, he would awaken and be drenched wet. He decided he would go buy the family a brand new kerosene heater, arguing with himself, if he replaced the old one, well, that would surely keep the family safe. Still, the dreams increased with realism and in length and with frequency. Finally, to a point he had to tell his wife. He was a bit shocked to hear her reply with empathy and understanding, saying she also had family members with the gift, and asked, "What should we do?" He felt better in sharing it with her, almost like a weight had been lifted, as well as the fact that he'd already replaced the old kerosene heater, but he still felt this impeding doom, that the event was still somehow coming, and it was coming very soon. They decided they would take the kids to Esau's mother's home. Grandma Amanda's house was far enough away that surely they would be safe there. Esau's wife would drive the kids down, and Esau would stay in the farm to care for the animals, but sleep in the barn for the week, and hopefully everything would pass by. But that night, while sleeping in the barn loft, once again, Esau's vision came to visit him in his sleep. This time, more dramatic. Each time he was trying to stay longer in the dream before he would be awakened. Each time gleaming to learn a bit more detail. On this night, he had made his way down the hall and entered into a dark living room. He still saw an old kerosene heater, which had embers sparking out of it onto a nearby curtain. He remembers thinking, "How? I replaced this." He pushed on as if pushing through quicksand, past the living room and into the small dining room, where before he had happened to remember seeing some papers and mail on the table. This time he pushed further to see the newspaper, and as he felt the fire flickering at his back and the pain starting in his leg, he began to hear his children and his wife screaming for help. Feeling those flames getting closer and closer, he knew he had only seconds before the sharp pain would wake him up, and he read the date on the newspaper. It was today. As he pulled back to his body into the bedroom, the room ignited with fire, and for the first time he was able to see the room that he was in. It wasn't his home. It was his childhood home. It was his mother's home, where his wife and his children were in bed. He once again awakened, hearing his wife and kids screaming his name, again drenched wet with the severe pain in his leg. The pain was so real that he hobbled out of the barn and jumped in the pickup to race for the 10-mile drive to his mother's home, hopefully to warn his family in time. He sped on the old gravel road, sliding around each corner. Panicked, he attempted something he had never done before. He was trying to evoke his gift. He tried to enter the vision and to send a message to warn them. He continued to drive faster and faster. He called out from his head, "Hear me! Get out! Get out of the house now! It's on fire!" As he approached the last half mile, another car came towards him in the opposite direction, and he veered to get out of the middle of the road, losing control of the truck and sliding off into a ditch. In doing so, he hit a tree on the driver's side, which shoved a broken piece of glass deep into his leg, the same leg in which he had experienced the pain that awoke him out of the visions each and every night. He ripped off his shirt and tied it around the leg, removing the shard of glass the best he could, trying to stop the bleeding. He exited the passenger door and ran as fast as he could, hobbling up the lane to the already engulfed home of his mother. He saw flashing lights and fire trucks, and firefighters were doing the best they could to squelch the fire, but the fire was so hot they could not control it. The flames were so blinding and so infumigating along that he heard his children screaming and already calling out to him, "Daddy, Daddy, we're here!" Then his wife, "Esau, Esau, oh no, someone help!" Just as he stepped up on the porch, a force tackled him down so hard he busted through the wood railing of the porch and felt engulfed with water. He struggled to his feet to see a firefighter who had stopped him. He said, "Sorry, I had to hose you down, or we both would have been dead. Come on, get away from there. Your family's safe. They're over here." Esau stood drenched wet with the water from the hose, straining in the smoke to see, and he heard his children and his wife call out, "We're safe. We heard you say get out, and we did." He ran to embrace his wife and children, along with his aging mother Amanda, who smiled gently up at him. "We all heard you, Esau. You have saved us all with your gift."
I never heard that story before.
I liked that one.
I'd heard the legends about being born with a call and it having, some impact, but
That story came out of a little local Missouri pamphlet book.
well, it seems like our visitor's getting a little more brave.
Yeah, I swore I saw something flickering there behind the tree in that light, and I'm hearing multiple sounds now. I'm not feeling real comfortable here, Bill. I'm second-guessing myself if this was a good choice.
I mean, if it's out there, you want to see it, don't you?
I want to see it, but I don't want to feel it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The smell has got better. I did spray a little bit of this bug off, so maybe that kind of drowned it a little bit, but it's a little putrid.
Well, for the Halloween season, I stumbled across an Ozark folktale that I really enjoyed. I know last year I did the one about the possessed house. It's kind of a similar story, but a little different. I think you'll like it. So back in the days when the Ozark Hills were wild and untamed, way back in the deep woods, there lived an old woman. This old woman had a reputation for being the best conjuring woman in the Ozarks. Now, with her messy salt and pepper hair, her 2 different colored eyes, one yellow and one green, and her crooked nose, I mean, no one was going to say that old Betty was a pretty woman.
Yeah.
But
She's a witch.
she was the best there was at fixing what ailed a person. That's what she was. She was good at that. Now, old Betty's house was full of herbs and roots and bottles filled with conjuring medicine. The walls were lined with strange books filled with magic spells. And she was the only one living in the hollow who knew how to read, so of course that gave her a leg up on most folks. Her granny, who was also a conjurer, had taught her how to read as part of her magical training, because, you gotta unlock that knowledge in those books. As well known, of course, you didn't hunt or fish on Betty's land, since crossing old Betty was a sure way to bring bad luck down upon your head. That was a protected place, a special place for her and her family. Now, just about the only friend old Betty had in the whole world was this tough, mean, old, ugly razorback hog that ran wild all over her place. It rooted around so much in her kitchen garbage that all that leftover magic and them spells started to get in this hog. Started to affect it way down deep. And some folks swore that old hog could sometimes walk upright just like a man.
Oh, wow.
And one fella claimed he'd been going by and seen that old pig sitting in the rocker on old Betty's porch, just chatting away with old Betty while she was brewing up potions in the kitchen. Now, everyone discounted the story due to the fact that fella who told the story, well, he's a little too fond of his shine, if you know what I mean. He used to get a little nip every now and then. Now, Rawhead was the name old Betty gave to this hog, referring maybe to the way the creature looked a bit like some of the dead pigs come butchering time. And, of course, the Razorback didn't much mind the name because, he's a Razorback hog. What does he care what somebody calls him? Now, Rawhead kept following old Betty around her little cabin and rooting up in her kitchen leftovers. And, well, he'd even go into town with her when she come to sell her remedies. Folks in town got so used to seeing old Rawhead and Betty walking around that, well, it looked mighty strange one day when, round hog driving time, Betty came into town without him. "Where's Rawhead?" asked the owner of the local general store. Betty would bring her goods and her potions and whatnot and would sell them in his shop, and then he'd, give her the proceeds. Well, Betty thought about it for a moment and said, "Well, I ain't seen him around today, and I'm mighty worried." "You ain't seen him here in town, have you?" "Well, nobody's seen him around town today. They would have told me if they had," said the owner. "Well, we'll keep a lookout for him for you." And old Betty responded, "Well, that's mighty kind of you. If you see him, tell him to come home straight away." Now, the shop owner nodded as he handed over Betty's weekly funds, and old Betty fussed all the way home. It just wasn't like Rawhead to disappear like this, especially not on the day when they go to town, because the man at the general store always saved his best scraps for the mean old Razorback, and, well, it ain't like an old hog to miss a free meal, right?
Right.
So when the old woman got home, she mixed up a potion, poured it onto a flat plate, kind of stared down into that liquid and said, "Where's that old hog got to?" Again, Betty could whip up all kinds of magic and potions, and sometimes she might just be able to see a thing, even though she wasn't there. And she asked that liquid, and in moments it clouded over, and a series of pictures flashed by. First, Betty saw the good-for-nothing hunter that lived on the next ridge, old Dan. Dan wasn't much of a hunter, didn't have much luck, and sometimes come hog running season, well, old Dan didn't have a whole lot to show for it. Well, she saw him sneaking around the forest rounding up razorback hogs what didn't belong to him. One of them hogs was Rawhead.
Uh-oh.
And then she saw him taking the hogs down into town where folks from the next town were slaughtering their razorbacks. And then she saw her hog, old Rawhead, slaughtered with the rest of the pigs and hung up for gutting. And the final picture that she saw in the liquid was a pile of bloody bones that had once been her hog, and his scraped clean head lying with the other hogs' heads in a pile. Now, old Betty was furious by this, the death of her only friend in the world. To her, this was just murder, plain and simple, and she wasn't going to let it stand. Everyone in 3 counties knew that Rawhead was her friend, and that lazy hog-stealing good-for-nothing Dan over on the next ridge, well, he's going to pay for slaughtering. Now, old Betty tried to practice white conjuring, good magic, helpful, most of the time. But old Betty knew some dark secrets, too, a little bit of black conjuring. And she pulled out an old secret book that her granny had given to her, told her never to use it unless she absolutely had to. And she turned to the very last page. She lit several candles and put them around the plate containing that liquid picture of Rawhead and his bloody bones. And she began to chant, "Rawhead and bloody bones. Raw head and bloody bones. Raw head and bloody bones. Well, the light from the windows disappeared as if the sun had been snuffed out like a candle. Pitch black darkness. Dark clouds billowed into the clearing where old Betty's cabin stood, and the howl of dark spirits could be heard in the wind that pummeled the treetops. Still she went on, raw head and bloody bones. Raw head and bloody bones. Betty continued this chant until a bolt of silver lightning left the plate and streaked out through the window, heading in the direction of town. When the silver light struck Rawhead's severed head, which was piled on the hunter's wagon with the other hogs' heads, well, it tumbled off onto the ground. And it rolled, and rolled and rolled until it was touching the bloody bones that had once been its body. Now, as the hunter's wagon rumbled away toward the ridge, where he lived, the enchanted Rawhead called out, "Bloody bones, get up and dance!" And immediately the bloody bones reassembled themselves into the skeleton of a razorback hog walking upright like the old man said he'd seen once upon a time. And the head hopped up on top of this skeleton, and Rawhead went searching through the woods for weapons to use against the hunter. He borrowed the sharp teeth of a dying panther, the claws of a long-dead bear, and the tail from a rotting raccoon. And he put them over his skinned head and bloody bones, and then Rawhead headed up the track toward the ridge looking for Dan, who had slaughtered him. He slipped past the thief on the road and slid into the barn where the hunter kept his horse and wagon. Rawhead climbed up into the loft and waited for old Dan the hunter to come home. It was dusk when the hunter drove into the barn and unhitched his horse. The horse snorted in fear, sensing the presence of Rawhead in the loft. And wondering what was disturbing his usually calm horse, the hunter looked around and saw a large pair of eyes staring down at him from the darkness in the loft. Now the hunter frowned, thinking it was some local kids fooling around in his barn. "Well, land of Goshen, what have you got those big eyes for?" he snapped, thinking the kids were trying to scare him with some kind of crazy mask.
"To see your grave,"
Rawhead rumbled very softly. The hunter snorted irritably and put his horse into the stall. Very funny. When he'd come out of the stall, he saw that Rawhead had crept forward a bit further, and now his luminous yellow eyes and his bear's claws could be seen. "Well, land of Goshen, what you got them big claws for?" he snapped. "You look ridiculous."
"To dig your grave,"
Rawhead toned softly, his voice a deep rumble. Well, that raised the hairs on the back of the old hunter's neck. He stirred a little uneasily, not sure how crazy this kid in his loft really was going to be. He didn't even know how he could make such a sound, if it really was a crazy kid up there after all. Feeling a little spooked, he hurried out the door and let himself out of the barn. And Rawhead slipped out of the loft and climbed down the side of the barn behind him, when nary a rustle to reveal his presence. Rawhead raced through the trees and up the path to a large moonlit rock. He hid in the shadow of the huge stone so that the only things showing were his gleaming yellow eyes, his bear claws, and his raccoon tail. When the hunter come level with the rock on the side of the path, he gave a yelp. Staring at Rawhead, he gasped, You nearly knocked the heart right out of me, you crazy kid. Land of Goshen, what you got that crazy tail for?"
"To sweep your grave,"
Rawhead boomed, his enchanted voice echoing through the woods, getting louder and louder with each echo. The hunter took to his heels and ran for his cabin. He raced past the old well house, past the woodpile, over the rotting fence into the yard. But Rawhead was faster. And when the hunter reached his porch, Rawhead leapt from the shadows and loomed above him. The hunter stared in terror up at Rawhead's gleaming yellow eyes, and the ugly razorback hog's head, his bloody bone skeleton with its long bear claws, its sweeping raccoon's tail, and the gleaming panther teeth. "Well, land of Goshen, what do you got those big teeth for?" he gasped desperately, stumbling backwards from the terrible figure before him.
"To eat you up, like you wanted to eat me,"
Rawhead roared, descending upon the good-for-nothing murderer. The murdering thief gave one long scream in the moonlight. Then there was nothing but silence and the sound of crunching. Nothing more was ever seen or heard of the lazy good-for-nothing hunter who lived up on the ridge. His horse disappeared that night, but sometimes folks would see Rawhead roaming through the forest in the company of his old friend Betty. And once a month, on the night of the full moon, Rawhead would ride the hunter's horse through town, wearing the old man's blue overalls on his bloody bones, with a hole cut out for his raccoon tail. In his bloody bear-clawed hands, he carried his raw razorback hogshead, lifting it high against the full moon for everyone to see.
I love that story. I had never heard that, but there was fragments that reminded me of Little Red Riding Hood. What what big eyes, and all this.
A little bit there, the Headless Horseman, even.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Little Red Riding Hood one kind of stood out to me right off the bat. I thought it was kind of a weird, kind of darker take on that particular story.
I love that one. And apparently we have some fans in the woods as well.
I don't think we got too much to worry about. I mean, seriously, if somebody was going to see Bigfoot around here, wouldn't they already seen him? I don't.
Surely.
Probably. I don't know if it makes me feel better or worse. It's probably just some rednecks out there trying to scare us or something.
Punk kids.
Punk kids, yeah.
Well, I've got another story to share, and it's called the Devil's Den. Now, here in Missouri, as stated previously, we're known as the Cave State. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of miles of underground tunnels and waterways that, feed many of these little bubbling springs that we're known for. But there is one with a darker, more possibly sinister side, contrary to most of the caves that carry the fresh, clear spring water. Now, it's located in Pulaski County.
I've been there.
Yeah, I bet you have. That's right up in your neck of the woods where you grew up, just up I-44 from us. Now, currently, it has become government military property, with only a few having access to it. And after you hear my story, it might be for good reason and understanding. This particular cave is near a river bluff, is one with painted Native American pictures on one of the overhanging outcrops. Now, of the pictures, there's one of a wolf, one of an eagle, and one of something else. Something that doesn't look like it belongs. But if you follow that narrow trail past those Native American glyphs, past the first, more well-known entrance, but before you get to the third and largest entrance, you'll probably miss what is the second entrance. You have to leave the trail and climb up around this giant boulder, and on the backside of that boulder, you will find an altered, almost carved doorway that goes deep beneath that rock. The door leads to a simple, narrow hallway, which ends at a sharp turn into a massive, round carved room. Imagine, if you will, an almost perfectly 40-foot wide circle with a carved seating ledge, if you will, about 18 inches wide, all along the outside perimeter of that circle room. In the center of that round room is a massive carved round table, almost 20 foot wide, slightly taller than the seating ledge along the outskirts of the room. Now, the ceiling is almost too perfectly domed, with what appears as centuries of aged black soot from torches and fires. This is known as the Devil's Den. If you look closely on the giant carved circle table in the center of this room, you may see what looks like some added bolts and links of chain. You may also notice some very aged carved relief indentations in the rock. These form a strange shape, and without much imagination, you can envision the chains attached to shackles, and some poor soul or souls stretched out as if for a human sacrifice. If you pour your bottle of water that you might have brought along on a hiking trip to that almost perfectly flat table with those same carved relief indentations, the water will take a flow in filling these, and it seems to form an engraving to possibly invoke 4 sections, each of those 4 sections representing an element. One for fire with flames, one for water with waves like that of an ocean or a river, the third for air with wispy-looking cloud shapes, and the latter, the fourth, a circle representing, we assume, Earth. Now, the makers of the Devil's Den are unknown, but with the history depicted by the Native American drawings on the cliffs outside, the one of the eagle and the wolf and the other thing, to whatever that is, it was as if maybe the Native Americans were trying to leave a warning by reassuring whatever this is that it definitely could go back pre-civilization, definitely before white man encountered this territory. Only scarce stories exist of the place, and few dare to seem to wish to speak about it. But from what little facts exist, it seems to be more of a druid-based Celtic lore than any conjured of demons and witchcraft. Now, some say the people who used this room was obviously, it was a well-thought-out plan, a design, and obviously very time-consuming to create. Therefore, it must have had a very important purpose. As those stories go, Each year, a virgin male and female were selected at the solstice of the fall harvest, where they would freely give themselves as human sacrifices to usher in a good and bountiful prosperity of good crops for their people. And as their blood drained from their bodies, following the veins of Mother Earth carved into the stone, activating these 4 quadrants of water, wind, earth, and fire, as their blood continued to flow through these reliefs, it would drip down into troughs carved that allowed the blood to mix with the spring water that flows out of this same cave. From there, the blood-tinted waters of the virgin pair would cascade down the hill and there intercept the flowing streams leading to the Gasconade River. To Native Americans, Celts, and many other civilizations, rivers and streams were essentially Mother Earth's veins. So in essence, the virgin pairs of bloods mixed with Mother Earth's, making her fertile enough to provide crops and animals for hunting for the following year. Now, to this day, a few brave soldiers up around Fort Leonard Wood state that they have heard echoes of strange chants rising up out of this valley nearby one of the military base's back gates. And around the time especially of the fall solstice or the harvesting season, the river seems to flow with a bit of a red tint in the water, and which seems to revitalize that area each and every year. So why did the military base stretch just far enough to enclose this cave, you might ask? Well, maybe it was just simple as where the lines fell on the map. But some say it was to protect the balance of the ecosystem, to protect nature itself. Much like a turtle, when a person approaches it, it pulls its neck in and hides, just hoping it'll move along. But maybe a bit of both are true. Early surveyors noted their compasses did not seem to work properly in that valley, that region, and each time they would attempt to map the area, it always altered, as if it wanted to be kept enclosed, away from most, but safer nonetheless from peering eyes and wandering seekers behind that military fence. And sometimes it's just better to let Mother Nature win, and to let sleeping beasts lie.
Well, speaking of sleeping beasts, I wish whatever was out there would go to bed. It's getting late now, and
I'd like to get some sleep tonight.
frankly, it's getting mighty close. It's almost like, hang on, man, what is that? Do you see that over there?
The eyes?
It's
like
more than
ice?
just oh, it's coming this way, Eric. We gotta go. We need to get out of here now.
I don't feel safe in this tent.
Run.
Car.
Run.
We gotta get to the car.
Let's get out of here.
We gotta get to the car. Get to the car, Bill.
Yeah, get out. Let's go.